Beneath the endless sun and rolling waves lies the Mediterranean, a sea that has cradled humanity's greatest triumphs and fiercest struggles. It is not just water, it is a living bridge, a stage where civilizations have risen, clashed, and blended for thousands of years. From the whispers of ancient traders navigating uncharted waters to the thundering cannons of empires vying for control, the Mediterranean is the thread that binds the stories of countless peoples and powers. To journey through its history is to dive into the heart of human ambition, creativity, and resilience, a tale as vast and enduring as the Great Sea itself. The Mediterranean, a sprawling, sunlit sea cradled between ancient lands, began its journey as more than just a body of water. It became the first great bridge between civilizations. It was here, amidst its shores and islands, that humankind first ventured into the unknown, their lives shaped by isolation and tentative connections. Long before the Mediterranean came to symbolize the bustling crossroads of empires, it was a quieter world, defined by the rhythms of early human survival, the whispers of myths yet to be born, and the slow, deliberate weaving of cultures. The story begins in an era when the Mediterranean's shape and shores were still shifting under the weight of geological time. Roughly 435,000 years ago, humans began to inhabit the lands bordering the sea, carving out their existence amidst harsh climates and untamed landscapes. Evidence of early hunters' camps near modern Rome and simple dwellings at Terra Amata near Nice shows the ingenuity of these early peoples. Their diets, rich with the spoils of their hunts, rhinoceros, elephant, and wild pig, hint at a rugged resilience. Yet even then, the Mediterranean exerted its pull. It provided not just sustenance but a horizon that beckoned with possibilities. As millennia passed, the first whispers of seafaring emerged. By 130,000 BC, primitive humans, perhaps swept by storms or driven by instinct, found their way to the islands of Crete. Theirs was not a story of grand exploration but of survival and chance, a narrative of those who might have clung to storm-borne debris to cross the waters. Meanwhile, Neanderthals on Gibraltar, perched at the edge of Europe, gazed across the narrow straits toward the shores of Africa, a land tantalizingly close yet unreachable to them. Their diets, rich with shellfish and crustaceans, reveal an early connection to the sea's bounty, even as its currents kept them tethered to their respective shores. The Mediterranean, however, was not yet a sea of bridges but one of barriers. It was during the Upper Paleolithic period, around 11,000 BC, that humans began to use the sea deliberately, albeit sporadically. Visitors to the island of Melos in the Cyclades sought obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for its sharp edges and utility in tools. This material, found only in certain parts of the Mediterranean, became a link binding disparate communities. Yet even as they navigated these waters, their journeys were local, their crossings fraught with uncertainty. The warming climate of 800 BC reshaped the Mediterranean and the lives of those who lived by its shores. As ice caps melted, the sea's level rose, transforming isthmuses into islands and reshaping coastlines. Human communities, thinly spread and fiercely self-reliant, began to adapt. Their diets shifted as the larger game disappeared, replaced by the sea's offerings of fish, mollusks, and seals. They buried their dead with care, layering bodies in ochre and adorning them with necklaces, perhaps in reverence for the spirits of the sea or the land. Yet, their ties to the Mediterranean remained tentative. They looked to the sea not as a pathway but as a provider, its waters a border rather than a conduit. Then came the Neolithic Revolution, an epochal shift that forever altered humanity's relationship with the land and the sea. Around 10,000 BC, across various corners of the world, humans began to domesticate plants and animals. In the eastern Mediterranean, this transformation led to the rise of the first settled communities. Jericho, with its towering walls and burgeoning population, was among the earliest. The inhabitants of Cyprus and Crete arrived with tools, seeds, and animals, creating a mosaic of self-sufficient settlements that dotted the Mediterranean shores. These were not seafarers but settlers, their gaze turned inward to the land they cultivated. Among these early communities, the people of Malta stand out for their monumental achievements. Isolated and insulated, They carved out a unique culture that culminated in the construction of massive temples and hypogea, predating even the pyramids of Egypt. These structures, adorned with spirals and labyrinthine corridors, suggest a society devoted to ritual and reverence. Malta's sacred isolation was so profound that its temples, symbols of spiritual and social unity, became unapproachable to outsiders. The end of this culture, brought about by invaders armed with bronze, marked a sharp and irrevocable break. The temples stood as silent witnesses to a civilization that had vanished. While Malta's story is one of insularity, Sicily's tale is one of connectivity and flux. The island's proximity to the Lipari Islands, rich in obsidian, made it a hub of early commerce. Settlements like Stentinello, with their artisans and command of surrounding resources, reflect a society deeply engaged with its environment. Over thousands of years, migrations brought new waves of settlers to Sicily, each leaving their mark on its culture. These exchanges, though slow and sporadic, began to weave the threads of a shared Mediterranean identity. The Mediterranean during this era was a patchwork of isolated societies, each shaped by its geography and resources. Yet, even amidst their isolation, they shared commonalities: the cultivation of crops, the domestication of animals, and the creation of pottery. Obsidian, with its sharp edges and accessibility, became a unifying material, its trade routes hinting at the first stirrings of a connected Mediterranean world. The sea, once a barrier, began to transform into a bridge, its waters carrying the seeds of trade, culture, and exchange. As the Neolithic Age gave way to the Bronze Age, the Mediterranean entered a new phase. But in these early millennia, it was a quieter, more contemplative sea. Its shores were home to communities that adapted to its rhythms, their lives shaped by its bounty and its boundaries. The Mediterranean, though not yet the bustling hub of empires, was already the cradle of connection, a mirror reflecting the tentative first steps of humanity's journey toward interconnection. In its depths and on its shores, the seeds of the great civilizations to come were being sown. The Second Mediterranean, spanning from 1000 BC to AD 600, was a period of profound transformation. What began as scattered, isolated communities gradually evolved into a network of vibrant, interconnected societies, bound together by trade, politics, and culture. This was an age of relentless motion, where the sea became both highway and battlefield, carrying merchants, migrants, and armies across its shimmering expanse. It was a time when new civilizations rose and clashed, when ideas took root and spread, and when the Mediterranean truly became the beating heart of the ancient world. In this era, the Mediterranean saw the emergence of the Phoenicians, masterful sailors and cunning traders who carved their niche in history as the first great maritime power. From their coastal cities in the Levant, Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, they ventured into the open sea, establishing colonies and trade networks that stretched from the eastern Mediterranean to the Atlantic. The Phoenicians were the merchants of antiquity, dealing in precious goods like purple dye, glass, and cedarwood. They not only traded commodities but also spread their knowledge of navigation, shipbuilding, and the revolutionary alphabet they developed. Their colonies, such as Carthage, grew into thriving hubs of commerce and culture, their influence rivaling even the great powers of the age. While the Phoenicians dominated the seas, the Greeks began to expand their influence, creating a tapestry of city-states that dotted the Mediterranean shores and islands. Their colonization efforts were driven by necessity. Overpopulation, scarce resources, and political tensions pushed them outward, searching for new lands. Cities like Euboea, Corinth, and Athens sent settlers to found colonies from the Aegean to Italy, Sicily, and North Africa. These colonies were not merely extensions of their mother cities. They developed their own identities, blending Greek culture with local traditions. This period saw the rise of a shared Hellenic identity, built upon common language, religion, and customs, even as individual city-states remained fiercely independent. The Greeks, however, were not just colonizers, they were also fierce competitors. This was an age of thalassocracies, maritime empires that vied for dominance over sea routes and trade networks. Athens, with its formidable navy, emerged as a power to be reckoned with, establishing control over the Aegean and parts of the eastern Mediterranean. Yet Athens' maritime empire would bring conflict with its rivals, particularly Sparta and its allies, leading to the devastating Peloponnesian War. The war not only drained Athens of its resources, but also fractured the fragile unity of the Greek world, leaving it vulnerable to outside forces. During this time, Carthage, the jewel of Phoenician colonization, began to assert its dominance in the western Mediterranean. Situated strategically on the North African coast, Carthage grew into a formidable power, its influence stretching across Sicily, Sardinia, and Spain. Its wealth came from its mastery of trade and its control of vital maritime routes. However, Carthage's ambitions brought it into direct conflict with another rising power, Rome. The Punic Wars, a series of brutal conflicts between these two titans, would shape the course of Mediterranean history. Rome's eventual victory marked the beginning of its transformation from a regional power into a sprawling empire. Rome's conquest of Carthage and its declaration of the Mediterranean as Mare Nostrum, our sea, was not just a political statement. It was a reflection of Rome's ability to dominate and integrate. The Roman Republic, and later the Roman Empire, brought unprecedented unity to the Mediterranean. Roads and aqueducts stretched across its territories, connecting far-flung provinces to the imperial center. Trade flourished under Roman rule, with goods flowing freely across the sea, grain from Egypt, olive oil from Spain, spices from the east. The Mediterranean became a Roman lake, a space of connectivity and exchange that facilitated not only economic prosperity but also the spread of Roman law, language, and culture. Yet Rome's Mediterranean was not just a space of trade and governance, it was also a battleground of ideas. The spread of Christianity during the first centuries AD reshaped the religious landscape of the region. Born in the eastern Mediterranean, Christianity spread through the trade routes and cities of the empire, finding converts among the poor and disenfranchised. Its message of salvation and community resonated in an empire marked by inequality and decadence. By the 4th century, Christianity had gone from being a persecuted sect to the official religion of the Roman Empire, its rise symbolized by the conversion of Emperor Constantine and the establishment of Constantinople as a new Christian capital. Despite Rome's dominance, the seeds of disintegration were already being sown. The empire's vastness, once its strength, became a liability as political corruption, economic stagnation, and external pressures began to mount. The Mediterranean, once a unified space under Roman control, fractured into competing regions. The rise of the Byzantine Empire in the east and the barbarian kingdoms in the west marked the end of the Second Mediterranean. Trade networks collapsed, cities shrank, and cultural exchange slowed. The sea that had once connected the ancient world now reflected its divisions. This era, with its sweeping changes and enduring legacies, transformed the Mediterranean into a stage for human ambition, innovation, and conflict. From the bustling harbors of Phoenician traders to the imperial courts of Rome, the Second Mediterranean was a time of profound interconnectedness, where the fortunes of empires rose and fell, and where the seeds of modern civilization were planted. It was a world both familiar and distant, its echoes still heard in the waters of the Great Sea today. The Third Mediterranean, spanning from AD 600 to 1350, was a time of fragmentation and renewal. The great unity that Rome had once imposed on the sea was gone, shattered by the collapse of the Western Empire and the rise of new powers. Yet, even in the chaos that followed, the Mediterranean retained its role as a bridge between cultures, a space of exchange, and a battlefield of ideas. This era was defined by the interplay of religion, commerce, and conquest, as the sea became the meeting ground of three great civilizations: Christendom, Islam, and Byzantium. In the early centuries of this period, the Mediterranean experienced a profound transformation with the emergence of Islam. The 7th century witnessed the meteoric rise of the Arab caliphates, whose expansion reshaped the southern and eastern shores of the sea. From the Arabian Peninsula, Muslim armies swept across North Africa and into Spain, bringing with them not only military conquest but also a vibrant and dynamic culture. Cities like Alexandria, Tunis, and Cordoba became centers of learning and trade, where the knowledge of the ancient world was preserved and expanded. The Islamic Mediterranean was a place of intellectual ferment, where scholars translated Greek texts into Arabic, laid the foundations of modern science, and enriched fields such as mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern remnant of the Roman world, found itself in a precarious position during this time. The loss of key territories to the Islamic caliphates marked a significant blow to Byzantine dominance in the Mediterranean. Yet, Byzantium proved remarkably resilient, preserving its rich cultural heritage and maintaining its naval power. Constantinople, the jewel of the empire, remained a beacon of trade and diplomacy, its strategic location at the crossroads of Europe and Asia making it a vital hub of the Mediterranean world. The Byzantines adapted to the challenges posed by the Arab fleets, developing the fearsome weapon known as Greek fire to defend their waters. Their survival in the face of relentless pressure ensured that the Christian East continued to play a central role in Mediterranean affairs. The Mediterranean of this period was not merely a battleground of empires but also a space of interaction between cultures. The Islamic caliphates, the Byzantine Empire, and the Christian kingdoms of Europe were not isolated from one another. Trade flourished even in times of conflict, with merchants carrying goods, ideas, and technologies across the sea. The great trading cities of Venice and Genoa rose to prominence during this time, their fleets crisscrossing the Mediterranean in pursuit of profit. These cities became vital intermediaries, linking the Islamic world to the markets of Europe. Spices, silk, and other luxuries flowed from the east to the west, enriching the coffers of the merchant republics and fueling the economies of the Mediterranean. The 11th century marked a turning point, as the balance of power in the Mediterranean began to shift. The Christian kingdoms of Europe, emboldened by the Reconquista in Spain and the growing strength of the papacy, launched the Crusades. These military campaigns, ostensibly aimed at reclaiming the Holy Land from Muslim control, had profound consequences for the Mediterranean. The Crusaders established a series of fragile states along the eastern shores of the sea, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem. These states, dependent on European support and vulnerable to Islamic counterattacks, became focal points of cultural and commercial exchange. Crusaders, pilgrims, and merchants alike traveled across the Mediterranean, bringing with them not only arms and supplies but also new ideas and technologies. Yet the Crusades also exposed the deep divisions within Christendom. The Fourth Crusade, diverted from its original goal, culminated in the sack of Constantinople in 1204. This event, a catastrophic blow to the Byzantine Empire, highlighted the growing rivalry between the Latin West and the Greek East. The Crusaders established a short-lived Latin Empire in Constantinople, but their actions left lasting scars on Byzantine Christian relations. Despite these divisions, the Crusades underscored the enduring importance of the Mediterranean as a space of connection and conflict. Amidst the turbulence of conquest and crusade, the Mediterranean also witnessed periods of remarkable stability and prosperity. The 12th and 13th centuries saw the rise of maritime empires, as cities like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa expanded their influence. These cities built powerful navies, secured trade routes, and established colonies and trading posts throughout the Mediterranean. Their dominance was underpinned by an intricate network of commercial relationships that linked the ports of the Mediterranean to markets as far afield as the Black Sea, the Middle East, and Northern Europe. This was a golden age of Mediterranean trade, driven by the demand for goods such as textiles, spices, and precious metals. The 13th century also marked the height of the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt, which played a crucial role in controlling the trade routes between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. The Mamluks, skilled in both warfare and diplomacy, maintained a strong presence in the eastern Mediterranean, ensuring that goods from Asia continued to flow through their ports. Their rivalry with the Crusader states and the Mongols underscored the precarious balance of power in the region. Despite the prosperity of this period, the Mediterranean was not immune to the forces of decline. The Black Death, which swept across Europe and the Mediterranean in the mid-14th century, dealt a devastating blow to the region's population and economies. The disease, carried by ships and traders, decimated port cities and disrupted trade networks. The great centers of Mediterranean commerce, Venice, Genoa, and Constantinople, were not spared. their populations ravaged by the pandemic. The Black Death marked the end of the Third Mediterranean, a period of remarkable connectivity and exchange overshadowed by the specter of mortality. The Third Mediterranean was a time of contrasts, of flourishing trade and devastating conflict, of intellectual exchange and bitter religious divisions. It was a world where cultures collided and converged, where the sea that separated them also brought them together. This era laid the foundations for the modern Mediterranean, shaping the relationships between Europe, the Islamic world, and Byzantium. In its waters and along its shores, the story of human ambition, resilience, and ingenuity continued to unfold, leaving an indelible mark on the history of the Great Sea. The Fourth Mediterranean, stretching from 1350 to 1830, marked an era of transformation, when the sea became both the site of intense conflict and the stage for unprecedented exploration and competition. This was a time when the Mediterranean had to redefine its significance, as the rise of the Atlantic powers challenged its once central role in global trade and politics. Yet, even as the balance of power shifted, the Mediterranean remained vital, a contested space where empires clashed, cultures mingled, and innovation thrived. As the 14th century waned, the Mediterranean world was still reeling from the devastation of the Black Death. The pandemic had gutted populations, disrupted trade, and left a lasting scar on societies across the region. But from this upheaval, resilience emerged. The city-states of Italy, Venice, Genoa, and Florence led the way in revitalizing Mediterranean commerce. Venice, in particular, retained its position as the dominant maritime power, controlling trade routes that brought spices, silk, and other luxuries from the east to Europe. Its ships were the lifeblood of Mediterranean trade, and its wealth funded the flourishing of the Italian Renaissance. The Renaissance, born in the Mediterranean, was not merely an artistic and intellectual movement. It was also deeply tied to the sea. Cities like Florence, Milan, and Venice became cultural capitals, their wealth generated by trade and banking. The Mediterranean's interconnectedness enabled the exchange of not just goods but ideas. Greek and Roman texts, preserved by Byzantine and Islamic scholars, were rediscovered, their knowledge inspiring the humanists of the Renaissance. Art, science, and technology flourished, and the Mediterranean became a crucible of innovation, where cultures influenced and enriched one another. However, this period also witnessed the rise of powerful new actors who would challenge the old order. The Ottoman Empire emerged as a dominant force, expanding from its Anatolian heartland into the Balkans and across the eastern Mediterranean. By the mid-15th century, the Ottomans dealt a crushing blow to the Byzantine Empire with the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. Renamed Istanbul, the city became the capital of a burgeoning empire that spanned 3 continents. The Ottoman Navy, under the command of legendary admirals like Barbarossa, asserted its dominance over the eastern Mediterranean, challenging Venetian supremacy and reshaping the balance of power. The western Mediterranean, meanwhile, saw the rise of Spain and Portugal as formidable powers. The unification of Spain under Ferdinand and Isabella, coupled with the expulsion of Muslim rulers from Granada in 1492, marked a turning point. The Spanish monarchy, fueled by its Catholic zeal and territorial ambitions, turned its attention to both the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. Christopher Columbus's voyage in 1492 signaled the beginning of the Age of Exploration, which would ultimately shift global trade routes away from the Mediterranean. Yet, Spain remained deeply engaged in Mediterranean affairs, its galleys battling Ottoman fleets and Barbary corsairs in a struggle for control of the sea. The 16th century was defined by this intense rivalry between the Christian powers of Europe and the Islamic Ottoman Empire. The Mediterranean became a theater of almost continuous conflict, as fleets clashed in epic naval battles. The most famous of these was the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, where a coalition of Christian forces, led by Spain and Venice, defeated the Ottoman navy in a decisive engagement. This victory, celebrated across Europe, marked a turning point in the struggle for Mediterranean dominance. Yet, while the Ottomans were checked at sea, they remained a formidable presence on land, their empire reaching its zenith under Suleiman the Magnificent. Amidst the battles and rivalries, the Mediterranean continued to serve as a space of exchange. The trade in goods, spices, textiles, and precious metals persisted, even between enemies. Merchants navigated the delicate politics of the region, forging connections that transcended religious and cultural divides. Jewish and Muslim traders, expelled from Spain during the Inquisition, found new homes in cities like Istanbul, Salonika, and Alexandria, where they played vital roles in the Mediterranean economy. These diasporas enriched the cultural and commercial fabric of the region, ensuring that the Mediterranean remained a melting pot of peoples and traditions. By the 17th century, the Mediterranean's role in global trade began to decline. The rise of Atlantic powers like England and the Netherlands shifted the economic center of gravity to the oceans. The discovery of new trade routes to Asia and the Americas bypassed the Mediterranean, reducing its significance as a hub of commerce. Yet, the sea retained its strategic importance. The struggle for control of Mediterranean ports and islands continued, with powers like France, Spain, and the Ottoman Empire vying for dominance. The Barbary corsairs, operating from the North African coast, became a persistent threat, their raids disrupting trade and capturing slaves. The 18th century brought further change, as new ideas began to reshape the Mediterranean world. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, science, and progress, found fertile ground in Mediterranean cities. Intellectuals in Italy, France, and the Ottoman Empire engaged with these ideas, challenging traditional authority and envisioning new political and social orders. At the same time, the rise of Russia as a Mediterranean power added a new dimension to the region's geopolitics. Catherine the Great's ambitions extended to the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean, bringing Russian fleets into conflict with the Ottomans and altering the balance of power. The Napoleonic Wars at the turn of the 19th century marked the culmination of this era of Mediterranean conflict. Napoleon Bonaparte, born on the island of Corsica, sought to control the Mediterranean as part of his grand imperial vision. His campaigns in Italy and Egypt brought the region into the heart of European geopolitics, disrupting trade and reshaping alliances. The British Navy, under the leadership of figures like Horatio Nelson, played a crucial role in countering Napoleon's ambitions, ensuring that the Mediterranean remained contested but unconquered. By 1830, the Mediterranean was a different place from what it had been 4 centuries earlier. The old powers of Venice and Genoa had faded, replaced by new empires and nation-states. The sea was no longer the center of global trade, but remained a vital crossroads, its shores and waters shaped by centuries of conflict and exchange. The Fourth Mediterranean was an era of transformation, where the old and the new collided, and where the sea continued to serve as a bridge between worlds, even as its role in the wider world began to change. It was a time of shifting horizons, when the Mediterranean both reflected and shaped the currents of history. The Fifth Mediterranean, from 1830 to 2010, saw a profound transformation in the sea's identity and role in the world. No longer the center of global trade or the focus of great empires, the Mediterranean adapted to the pressures of industrialization, colonialism, decolonization, and globalization. It became a space of persistent tension, a passageway rather than a destination, yet one where ancient legacies intertwined with modern challenges. This era was marked by competing visions of control, fragmented identities, and the enduring allure of the Mediterranean as a cultural and historical crossroads. By the 1830s, the Mediterranean's role as a strategic and political arena was reshaped by European imperial ambitions. France's invasion of Algeria in 1830 marked the beginning of a new phase of colonial dominance in North Africa. The French established control over Algeria, Tunisia, and later Morocco, while Britain fortified its presence in the eastern Mediterranean by seizing key positions such as Malta, Gibraltar, and Cyprus. The Suez Canal, opened in 1869, became a pivotal artery, linking the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. This new channel of commerce revitalized the Mediterranean's strategic importance, transforming it into a highway for global trade and imperial expansion. The Ottoman Empire, once the dominant power in the eastern Mediterranean, was now in decline, its influence eroding under the pressures of internal decay and external threats. The empire's retreat created a vacuum that new national movements sought to fill. Greece, after a hard-fought war of independence in the 1820s, became the first of many Balkan states to break free from Ottoman rule. These newly emerging nations, inspired by the ideals of nationalism and fueled by European support, redrew the map of the Eastern Mediterranean. Yet, the process of nation-building was fraught with conflict, as ethnic and religious divisions deepened. The late 19th century brought a wave of modernization to Mediterranean societies, as industrialization reached its shores. Ports like Marseille, Trieste, and Alexandria grew into bustling hubs of trade and migration. Steamships replaced sailing vessels, enabling faster and more reliable connections across the sea. Cities along the Mediterranean coast became melting pots, where European, North African, and Middle Eastern cultures mingled. This was an age of optimism and progress, but it was also one of deepening inequality, as colonial powers exploited the resources and labor of their Mediterranean territories. The Mediterranean's strategic significance was reaffirmed during the world wars of the 20th century. In World War I, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire led to the partitioning of its territories, with Britain and France carving up the Eastern Mediterranean under the terms of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon became mandates under European control, while Turkey emerged as a secular republic under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. The aftermath of the war saw the Mediterranean as a space of simmering tensions, where nationalist movements in North Africa and the Middle East began to challenge colonial rule. World War II brought the Mediterranean to the forefront of global conflict. The sea was a critical theater of operations, as Axis and Allied forces vied for control of its waters and shores. Key battles, such as those in North Africa and the invasion of Sicily, highlighted the Mediterranean's strategic value. The war left the region devastated, its cities bombed, its populations displaced. Yet it also marked the beginning of a new era, as the old colonial powers weakened and the seeds of independence movements took root. The post-war period saw the Mediterranean divided by the Cold War. The sea became a boundary between the capitalist West and the communist East, with NATO and the Warsaw Pact vying for influence. The United States established a strong naval presence in the Mediterranean, while the Soviet Union sought to counterbalance it through alliances with countries like Egypt and Syria. This geopolitical rivalry exacerbated tensions in the region, particularly in the Middle East, where the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 and subsequent Arab-Israeli conflicts reshaped the political landscape. The latter half of the 20th century was defined by decolonization, as countries in North Africa and the Middle East gained independence from European rule. Algeria's brutal war of independence from France, which ended in 1962, symbolized the struggles of decolonization in the Mediterranean. The newly independent states faced the challenge of building nations amidst the legacies of colonialism and the pressures of the Cold War. Their economies, often reliant on Mediterranean trade, struggled to adapt to the shifting dynamics of global commerce. Meanwhile, the Mediterranean underwent a cultural transformation. The rise of mass tourism in the 1950s and 1960s brought millions of visitors to its sun-soaked shores. From the French Riviera to the Greek islands, the Mediterranean became synonymous with leisure and luxury, a far cry from its historical role as a battleground of empires. Yet, this newfound prosperity was unevenly distributed, as coastal resorts thrived while inland regions and North African countries faced persistent poverty and underdevelopment. The Mediterranean of the late 20th and early 21st centuries was a sea of contrasts. On the one hand, it was a space of opportunity, where trade, tourism, and cultural exchange flourished. On the other, it was a site of conflict and crisis. The rise of political Islam, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the wars in Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria brought violence and instability to the region. The Mediterranean also became a gateway for migration, as thousands of people from Africa and the Middle East risked their lives to cross its waters in search of a better future in Europe. These migrations underscored the inequalities that continued to define the Mediterranean, as the wealth of its northern shores stood in stark contrast to the struggles of its southern and eastern coasts. As the 21st century unfolded, the Mediterranean faced new challenges. Climate change threatened its delicate ecosystems, rising sea levels endangered its coastal cities, and overfishing depleted its once abundant resources. Yet, the Mediterranean remained a space of resilience and renewal. Its history of connectivity, its role as a meeting place of cultures, and its enduring beauty continued to inspire and shape the lives of those who lived along its shores. The Fifth Mediterranean was a story of adaptation, a testament to the sea's ability to endure amidst change. It was no longer the dominant arena of global history, but its legacy as a cradle of civilization and a bridge between worlds endured. The Mediterranean, with its ancient waters and timeless allure, remained at the heart of the human story, a reminder of the interconnectedness of past, present, and future. The Mediterranean, a sea that has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the mingling of cultures, and the ebb and flow of human ambition, stands as one of history's most enduring arenas. Across millennia, its waters have been a bridge, a battleground, and a mirror reflecting the complexities of human civilization. From the quiet, isolated communities of the First Mediterranean to the globalized tensions of the Fifth, the sea has been both a constant and a canvas, shaping and being shaped by the peoples and powers that have lived along its shores. Its history is not linear but cyclical, marked by periods of unity and fragmentation, prosperity and decline. The First Mediterranean was one of discovery, where early humans cautiously approached its shores, crossing its waters in search of survival. Over time, the Mediterranean transformed into a vibrant highway of trade and ideas, as civilizations like the Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans turned its surface into a space of commerce and conquest. Yet, with each new chapter, be it the unifying reach of Rome, the religious and cultural exchanges of the Islamic and Christian worlds, or the intense rivalries of modern empires, the Mediterranean evolved, adapting to the changing forces of history. What makes the Mediterranean unique is not just its geography but its ability to connect. It is a space where cultures have met and mingled, where differences have clashed but also enriched one another. The spread of religions, the flow of trade, and the exchange of ideas have all been facilitated by its waters. It has been a space of invention, where innovations like the alphabet, navigation techniques, and the foundations of modern science were born. Even during times of conflict, such as the Crusades, the battles of Lepanto, or the struggles of the world wars, the Mediterranean's underlying role as a connector persisted, forcing interaction between disparate peoples. Yet, the Mediterranean's history is also one of resilience in the face of adversity. Its shores have weathered invasions, plagues, and environmental challenges, adapting to each new phase of human development. Even as the rise of the Atlantic and the globalization of trade diminished its central role, the Mediterranean remained relevant. It became a symbol of both ancient legacy and modern struggle, a space where the past is ever present, influencing the identity of its peoples and nations. Today, the Mediterranean continues to embody these dualities. It is a region of beauty and conflict, opportunity and inequality, innovation and crisis. Its shores are home to vibrant cultures and bustling cities, yet its waters bear the weight of migration, environmental degradation, and geopolitical tension. The story of the Mediterranean is, ultimately, the story of humanity itself, a tale of ambition, conflict, adaptation, and interconnectedness. It reminds us that the sea, with all its turbulence and tranquility, is not just a backdrop to history, but a vital participant in shaping our collective journey. In its enduring waters lies a reflection of the human spirit, resilient, ever-changing, and deeply connected.